Welcome to Breaking Ties, Destination Divorce. This is your go-to source for practical advice and support while you go through the divorce process. Join us each weekday for a quick chat where we'll cover a variety of topics such as child custody, property division, and self-care. Together, we'll explore emotional, financial, and legal aspects of divorce and help you find the best path forward for you and your family. Here's your host and Certified Divorce Financial Analyst Professional, Mike Fulkerson.
Welcome to the third day of the Breaking Ties interview series, where we talk with professionals who assist those getting people through the divorce process and answers many common questions that you might have. As always, I'm your host, Mike Fulkerson, and with me today again is our friend Marson Maynor. Marson is a loan officer with Geneva Financial and has a ton of experience in mortgages. Welcome back, Marson.
Thanks, man. Great to be here. Looking pretty sprite today.
You're not looking too bad yourself.
Right on, man. Thanks.
All right. So we're going to roll out the first question here for our listeners. And if our listeners hasn't picked up on the other two podcasts we've done, you're going to want to go back and listen to those because we had some really great questions that we went through, and Marson provided some excellent advice. So today we're going to start off with, how is the equity in the house divided between spouses?
Right on. So pretty cut and dry, just more of a math thing, really. Typically when going through the divorce process, let's just use, everybody's, they're separating amicably, 50-50, right? We're just going to split everything down the middle. So let's just say they own a home together. Home is worth, $400,000. They have a $200,000 mortgage. They're like, okay, split the equity. So $100,000 each for the remaining two. And you also want to make sure that even though someone may be, the way the negotiations go says that the other spouse should get X amount of money, you have to remember if because they're keeping the property. I mean, if they're selling, then it's just 50-50 of net proceeds and then they're done. But if they're retaining ownership of, one of them is retaining ownership of the property, they're going to be limited on the maximum dollar or the maximum dollar percentage that they can withdraw from the house on a cash out refinance. So there's going to be some limitations. Sometimes it can be done, sometimes it can't. It just depends on what is negotiated, and then obviously how the house appraises, what they currently owe, and then affordability too, because I think we mentioned this in a previous chat. Borrowing today is a little bit more expensive than it was even 2 years ago. And a lot of people took advantage of refinancing and have a low interest rate. Interest rates are not that low anymore. So retaining the property, trying to pull out that extra money, and now increasing the debt on the mortgage at a higher interest rate, it can all play a role in the ability to be able to do that. So sometimes you can't do it and you have to sell. So it just depends. But talk to a lender, get your questions answered.
Yeah. So we talk a lot about dividing up property and assets and stuff. And then you also talk about transferring ownership from one spouse to the other. Are there tax implications that you're aware of when transferring ownership of the home?
Not typically if one is basically just staying on property. Now, then this could be a completely unique situation, but possible, where one spouse, they live together, but only one of them is on the mortgage. But based on their negotiation, the spouse that's not on the loan wants to retain the ownership, where they have to get a mortgage for themselves. Then that could create something, because you're actually changing possibly the title of the ownership. So you're actually, the courts don't care who's changing hands, but if you're changing hands, sometimes there's repercussion based on a timeline. Like, for example, capital gains. You need to own the property for at least 2 years. So, and I'm, again, not an attorney. You'd want to check with them. But typically, let's say, 2 years ago, married couple bought a home, and, now they're in the process. It's less than 2 years, let's say. They're in the process now, and they're debating on what to do. Well, if they go sell the property, that could be one tax implication, because they didn't wait the 2 years, but it may not hurt them to have one of them retain, because it's still staying like within the family. So it's more of a tricky kind of question based on the specific scenario for them and how they're negotiating.
Right. Yes. And like you said, you're going to want to, talk with the attorney, but also you might enlist an accountant to help you out as well, just to make sure you're on the right side of those tax issues. So, an interesting question that has popped up is, what if the house is underwater? The mortgage balance exceeds the home value. Any thoughts on how that might play out?
Yeah, I mean, you're already talking about being underwater, and nobody wants to be underwater no matter what, unless you got air. So, um, the short answer is you can do it. If you're not going to have, one of them is not going to retain the property and be able to be expected to compensate the other spouse who's vacating the property with any kind of money, because if the balance is less than what they currently owe, hence being underwater, then there is no money, there's no equity to share, right? So all that's going to bring that back is time, right? Pretty much. So it honestly, a short sale situation is probably going to be better for both of them. But again, I'm more talking from my own personal opinion, because anytime you can own real estate, and especially if you have kids, you don't want to be moving them around if you don't have to. But if, because of underwater short sale situation, it may be better just to stay in the home, make arrangements to continue to pay the mortgage, wait it out, let the value start to increase, and just, it's going to be playing more of a long game. But you go short sale, you could be, responsible for, if you sell the property for less than what you owe, you need to get approval from your lender, but you could also owe that money down the road as well. You're not just going to be able to walk away from, being short, so to speak. So that's a tough one. It really is. And that's, you definitely, not only if you're going through that kind of situation, you might want to have a real estate attorney representing, the house, so to speak, whoever's going to, retain ownership, because they need to be able to work with the lender and, make sure things are going to be okay. So it's a tough situation for sure.
That definitely very tough. And,
Yeah.
Our listeners are definitely going to want to enlist someone with a lot of experience as well on the short sale side. Like you said, a real estate attorney. All right. So let's go with the last question of our session today. Can a prenuptial agreement affect the division of the home in a divorce?
Absolutely, because the way the prenup is read, it's a negotiation. But from the standpoint of who may be responsible depending on what happens, is really going to be determined based on, is there a mortgage of the property, and how did the deed of the property get recorded? Because even though you might sign a prenup, and again, I'm not an attorney, so a prenup is just an agreement between two people that is authorized, or, the blessings given by the court. But when it comes to owning a property, you have a personal promissory note to a creditor that says that you owe it. So just because you may not be responsible in a prenup situation, the mortgage company isn't going to say, oh, because you have a prenup, we're just going to let you off the hook. It doesn't work that way. So again, that's where you talk about, maybe if you're going to retain, you do a refi, or you sell and you don't have to worry about it then, because everything would be dissolved.
Right.
That was an easy one.
Excellent. Well, we appreciate your time again today, Marson. And this concludes our third day of the week here of our interview. Please join us tomorrow as we continue our discussion on mortgages and divorce. Believe it or not, there are more questions. And Marson and I would like to thank you for joining us today on the Breaking Ties interview series. Should you have any questions for Marson, you can find his contact information in the description of the podcast. And remember, divorce is not the end of your story. It is the start of your next great chapter. See you tomorrow.
We want to thank you for listening to this episode of Breaking Ties, Destination Divorce with Mike Fulkerson. For questions, please reach out to Mike via email in the description, or give him a shout at 630-444-1410. Remember to subscribe, like, and follow.